From the author of Spinsterella, the strange and unusual romance and spellbound, a darker shade of black comes the legendary Magic Children. Pick up the conclusions of the Spinsterella trilogy in paperback and e-readers this Halloween. I took a moment to watch ABC's Inhumans series last Friday, and it's just as bad as everyone says it is online. I thought Marvel Studios was in trouble after seeing the dreadful back six of Luke Cage, Netflix's horrible Iron Fist, that wretched Spider-Man Homecoming at the theater, and Netflix's awful Defender series. However, Inhumans shows me how much worse things are getting at Marvel Studios as related to quality. If they keep putting out crap like this, the nails are going to be put in Marvel Studios' coffin sooner rather than later. Just like Spider-Man Homecoming, Marvel's Inhumans decided they wanted to make compromises as related to the source material. And these compromises as related to the source material are doing damage to Marvel Studios' adaptations. Now, back in 2008, when they released Iron Man, we got a film that literally was like watching an old David Michelin, Bob Layton Iron Man comic book come to life. But with Marvel's Inhumans, the quality bar has fallen so far, we're not getting an adaptation that's true to the source material or an adaptation that even meets the standards of Marvel Studios. What I saw on screen with your Inhumans was a production with production value so low they reminded me of many of these old 1990s syndicated programs that came on Saturday afternoon. Now, back in the 1990s, we had a whole host of syndicated shows that came on. Shows like Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Hercules The Legendary Journeys, and Xena Warrior Princess. And while shows like Deep Space Nine, Hercules, and Xena were on the high level of syndicated quality, shows on the lower level were like that of the 30-minute Nightman series that came out in the mid-90s and Sheena that came out in the early 2000s. And when I looked at Marvel's Inhumans, it reminded me so much of the mid-1990s Nightman series or the early 2000s Sheena or Zen Gesner's Sinbad. That's how bad Marvel's Inhumans is. And it's really sad to see the show be so bad and see be such poor quality with all the money poured into it. Now, your Sinbads, your Nightmans, and your Sheenas could all say that they had small budgets, and that's why the production values weren't that great. But here we have a show that was originally planned to be a movie and all the money poured into it, and the production values were just subpar as it relates to these Inhumans. And when I look at this Inhuman show from a story perspective, what makes it not work is the fact that your Inhumans just aren't relatable people. Now, Marvel thought that the Inhumans could be just like the X-Men because these were people who lived away from society and they had special powers. Unfortunately, when you look at the story of the story of the Inhumans has nothing relatable to people. Now, the X-Men, these were people who were just like us. They were regular Joes like you and me. They were regular people on the ground. They had special powers that made them different, but they went to school like any other kid, and they wanted to learn how to live in society like every other kid. And they went to Professor Xavier schools to learn how to master their powers and be a part of society. In some ways, they were just like the outsider kids who sat in the back of the cafeteria, like your punks, like your goths, like some of the black kids, and the other people many people in the world would call freaks. They want everyone to know they're just like everyone else, and they want to be left alone to do their own thing. That's what made the X-Men relatable. They were regular people, but they had something extra, as Professor X said, and this gift allowed them to have something special that they wanted to share with people. And Professor Xavier wanted to teach them how to share that gift with others and contribute to society. Now, your Inhumans, on the other hand, are like geeks, and they exhibit the worst traits of geek and geek culture. When it comes down to your Inhumans, they think that they're smarter than everyone else. They think that they're better than everyone else. And they come across as a bunch of elitists who walked away from humanity to form their own little perfect society on the moon. And it's hard for people to relate to these kind of characters because these kind of characters remind them of people like your Bill Gates or your Mark Zuckerberg or many of these other rich guys out here who believe that they are better than everyone else and want to try to shape and mold a society that fits their narrative and their viewpoint. And when you look at the Inhumans, they come across as a bunch of snobby elitists who think that they are superior to everyone else, and that makes it hard for the average viewer to relate to this group of people and see them as a group of heroes. They don't see them as heroes because they have no relatable character traits in them. When I looked at the Inhuman show and I looked at the way Maximus was leading his coup, I was kind of relating to Maximus up to a point until he started simping on Medusa. When he started simping on Medusa, that's when I decided, this show, the quality of it wasn't that great because there wasn't a single person in there with a human character trait that was relatable to anyone. When you look at 2008's Iron Man, yes, Tony Stark was a bit of a jerk, but there was something relatable in him and something human about him people could connect with. When you look at Steve Rogers in Captain America's The First Avenger, there was something there that was relatable in Steve Rogers in the fact that he wanted to serve his country and he wanted to share with others. And when you look at Tony Stark again, he wanted to defend the world and he wanted to protect the world. There was something in his characterization that was relatable. With these Inhumans, there was not anything there that allowed you to connect with them. And this is why your Inhumans were nothing like the X-Men, because the X-Men, they were just kids, and these were kids with open minds, and they wanted to be a part of society. They wanted to be accepted by society, and they wanted to contribute to society in some sort of way. That's why the X-Men resonate with many people who are outsiders, like goths, like punks, like black people, and like some groups outside in the white community, and people all over the world, because the X-Men remind us of ourselves and the best about ourselves. The Inhumans, on the other hand, do not show us anything really great about ourselves. They remind us of guys like Zuckerberg, your Bill Gates, and many others who want to call themselves shaping society. They remind us of rich elites, and that's not something you really want to put in a superhero show that you're trying to sell to Joe and Jane average out here. Now, what adds insult to injury with this Inhuman show, again, is that it looks nothing like the comics. When you look at the costumes, when you look at the wardrobe, when you look at the characterizations, there's not a single thing there that any viewer could screams at you and says, these are the Inhumans. When I looked at the original pictures that they released online earlier, there was nothing there that said to me, Inhumans, when I looked at them. I remember looking at 2008's Iron Man, and I said to myself immediately, that's Iron Man. I mean, it reminded me, even though it looked different, I could look at the essence of the picture and say to myself, this is Iron Man. And when I watched the movie, I said to myself, I saw so much of Michelin and Bob Layton's Iron Man on screen, it just said Iron Man. But with this Inhuman show, there was nothing there. Again, it looked like a really bad 1990s syndicated TV show like Nightman, and that really was detrimental to this show. And when you really look at this show in contrast to Agent Carter was a show that was 10 times better than this Inhumans, because your Agent Carter had great production values, Agent Carter had really good stories, and Agent Carter was just an overall better show. When I look at this show and I look at Agent Carter, I'm wishing that we had Agent Carter Season 3 instead of these Inhumans on my screen. Now, when I look at the story for this Inhumans, it starts with Black Bolt being named King of the Inhumans, and then Maximus leads the coup to overthrow him. And over the course of that 2 hours, as the royal family deals with this coup, we watch Lockjaw teleporting the royal family to different parts of the Hawaiian Islands. And that's supposed to be the story, that everyone is lost and everybody is trying to find each other. And that's what's going to happen over this whole first season. I'm sorry, that's just not enough story, and that story just doesn't have enough substance to really grab a viewer and make them interested in continuing to see it. The story is predictable, the story is by the numbers, and it just does not meet the standard established by Marvel Studios, because I know they can write better than this, because when I look at the first 6 episodes of Luke Cage and I see how high quality the storytelling was on the first 6 episodes of Luke Cage, that's the kind of bar I think that Marvel Studios should have had with this Inhumans. In fact, I believe they should have even raised that bar even higher, because for a Netflix series to have that type of quality writing, and this is broadcast television, I think you should have upped the bar a little higher. When I look at this Inhumans, again, The quality bar has been dropped, and it's been dropped deep into the ground. I mean, when I look again, this show reminded me of Nightman and Sheena in terms of quality. It's just not good enough, and it just doesn't meet the standard established by your Marvel Studios. I mean, I look at it and I say to myself, you canceled Agent Carter for this. Agent Carter blew the doors off this show. And really, Kevin Feige needs to fire the head writer of this show because he screwed up Iron Fist with the terrible writing he put on that show. And he's screwed the Inhumans with this horrible writing he's put on this show. This Inhumans is not even on the level of Greg Berlanti's Arrow, Flash, and Legends of Tomorrow. That's why this guy needs to be fired as a head writer. He just does not meet the standard for Marvel Studios. And what he's placed in this adaptation clearly shows me he's not qualified to adapt Marvel's comics into television shows at all. Now, unlike previous Marvel Studios projects, this Inhumans doesn't feel like a comic book come to life. Again, it feels like a 1990s syndicated superhero show. And when I look at it, the quality just isn't there in this adaptation. I don't feel the heart of a Marvel comic. I don't feel the spirit of a Marvel comic. And I don't feel what it captures a Marvel comic in its essence, like many of these Marvel Studios movies like Iron Man, Captain America, The Avengers, and Avengers Age of Ultron and Captain America Civil War. All of them felt like a Marvel comic come to life. This Inhumans feels like a really bad television show. And what I really did not like about watching this Marvel's Inhumans is the confirmation that the SJW poison that was in Marvel's publishing division is now corrupted Marvel Studios. First, when I was watching Spider-Man Homecoming, I noticed that they tried to shoehorn diversity into many of these Marvel Studios projects, and now they're trying to continue to push that agenda with Marvel's Inhumans. What really made Spider-Man Homecoming extremely difficult to watch was all of this forced diversity that was shoehorned into that film. I mean, when I looked at that Indian Flash Thompson, I did not see a guy who would be able to bully Peter Parker. I saw an Indian guy shoved into a role where he didn't fit. And I looked at Peter's best friend. Yes, he came from Miles Morales in the Ultimate books, but he did not fit organically in the Peter Parker story. Now, if you had the real muscular Flash Thompson as a bully, I could relate to that. If you had Harry Osborn as his friend and they were talking science, I could relate to that because those are elements core to Peter Parker's Spider-Man. When I looked at Spider-Man Homecoming, it looked like they were trying to put a rainbow of diversity, but whenever you try to shoehorn a rainbow of diversity, the irony is you show how racist things truly are. And when I looked at Marvel's Inhumans and its SJW forced diversity, I saw the racism truly on the screen of this show. Now, on this show, your Black Bolt, your Medusa, and your Crystal are white people, and your Gorgon and your Karnak have been changed from their original ethnicities to diversity ethnicities. Your Karnak is now an Asian guy, and that's a racist stereotype because when you have the Asian guy out here talking about he's the smart guy, that's a racist stereotype towards Asians. And the one that offended me the most was Gorgon. Now you have Gorgon who's supposed to be black, and your Gorgon is a black guy, and he has hooves. And I look at that and I say to myself, that's racist because you are comparing the black man to an animal. So when I look at Gorgon, I see Marvel's Inhumans promoting the racist stereotype that the black man isn't human and that he has very less humanity than the other characters. So when I look at that attempt at diversity, it really falls apart, especially when you compare that so-called diversity to last year's Agent Carter Season 2. Now on Agent Carter Season 2, we had a black scientist come on the show, and this black scientist was shown to be just as smart as Howard Stark, and in some ways he was presented as a love interest to Peggy Carter. And when we saw him on the show, he was presented on an equal level to Howard Stark and Peggy Carter. Unfortunately, many racist fanboys didn't like the idea of this black scientist on the show, and a lot of people at ABC from the executive division didn't like the idea of this black scientist being a love interest to your Peggy Carter, like your James Olsen was a love interest to Supergirl, and many of the other black characters on these Berlanti shows in general. So there was an effort to neuter this and emasculate this black scientist in the middle of Agent Carter season 2, and then after that, once the season was over, your Agent Carter was canceled. And what's really sad is that your Agent Carter was set and adapted to the golden age of comics, a period where there was tremendous racism and during the Jim Crow period. And in this golden age show that is set during the golden age of comics, where there was the most racism, the irony is we saw more diversity on Agent Carter than we do in this modern age Inhumans, because during the age of Jim Crow, where the golden age of superheroes was, Marvel had a hero called Whitewash, who was basically a caricaturized minstrel image. But on Agent Carter, we got to see a humanized black man on screen, and that was one of the great moments in comic television history and comic cinematic history, one on the same level of Captain America Civil War, where we saw 3 black superheroes on the same level of Captain America. Now, Agent Carter and Captain America Civil War, those were positive steps for diversity. Those were positive presentations of people of color on screen. What I saw in your Inhumans was SJW diversity, which is nothing more than racism repackaged and breathes new life into old stereotypes. When I watched the Inhumans, I was deeply offended by the presentation of Gorgon, and I was deeply offended by the presentation of Karnak, because both characters were not true to themselves, and they were shoehorned forced diversity that was meant to make things look like these characters weren't racist, but ironically show the world how racist they actually are, and how insecure the producers are, and how uncomfortable they are regarding people of color, like black people and like Asian people. Now, I saw on numerous blogs, I posted on numerous blogs that Marvel Studios was in trouble. And when I look at this Inhuman series, it's clear to me that Marvel Studios has gone from being in trouble to being in crisis. Because when I look at the quality of shows like Agent Carter and previous Marvel productions like Captain America, Iron Man, The Avengers, and many others, there was clearly a standard set for quality, a standard set for writing, a standard set for costumes, a standard set for production values, and a standard set for what a Marvel Studios production is. That standard has slipped over the last couple of years, and now we're looking at a studio that is in crisis because the productions they are producing are far below par. Ever since Luke Cage got shot with the Judas bullet by Diamondback, we've gotten a complete betrayal of what Marvel Studios used to stand for. Adaptations that made every effort to stay true to the source material and capture the spirit of what a Marvel comic was on screen. We're not getting that anymore as relating to these Marvel Studios productions. Instead, we're getting compromised material like your Defenders and like your Spider-Man Homecoming, and this is becoming the standard instead of the exception. And I believe if Marvel Studios continues to produce content like this, we're not going to see many superhero movies in the future, because if the quality continues to drop like this, I'm seeing the end of Marvel Studios and the end of the superhero movie genre sooner rather than later. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link to the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, The Temptation of John Haynes, and many other books like the Spinsterella Trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.